Everyone, this is poor quality video because I just put away all of my camera stuff and realized I forgot to film an intro to this. So welcome to my first reading vlog. Spoilers, I changed my hair halfway through it. I decided to read 3 different books that are set in a pandemic because I live in the United States, and like much of the world, the part of the United States where I live was heavily impacted by COVID-19. And now that I am fully vaccinated myself and can kind of look back on the way things started and how everything happened, did these authors kind of predict that, or in the case of the 1918 one, portray it very well about how people, governments, etc., actually act in the face of this kind of threat? I don't know if it was necessarily a fun idea. I was just curious. And before I get into the actual vlog itself, I do want to recognize that I am very lucky to live in a part of the world that had easy access to the vaccines. I cannot overstate how grateful I am to live where I do at this point in time. But with that, let's get into the reading vlog and what I thought of the books. Made it to the park. I have a lovely line on my forehead because safety first. And now I'm gonna read for a little bit. Of course, I choose to bike on the hottest day so far. Doing a quick check-in here. I'm not very good at vlogging yet, so we'll figure out how this works. I hit about 90 pages into Severance and I am loving it. The basic premise is we're following a young woman who lives in New York around the time that a pandemic starts, and this is actually a fungal infection called Shen fever. It does come out of China, and we're kind of following her experiences basically post-apocalypse and her life leading up to it. It definitely has a lot of snark in it. It's clearly like a millennial book. I think that's kind of evidenced by the pink cover. I am looking forward to doing more reading. I have a lot of stuff I have to do today, so we'll see what I get to. But I mean, right now I am doing important kitty cuddles and I'm going to go see some family soon. But I plan on carving out at least an hour to read today. I am terrible at vlogging because I don't have any aesthetic morning routines or anything, so I am spending the rest of my Sunday reading Severance and hoping that it doesn't get too hot. I also plan on doing a picnic with a friend. We're actually going to discuss a couple books that we've both read just at different times. We do like a really informal book club where we meet when we can, and I think that we're going to be discussing Certain Dark Things by Silvia Morena Garcia and Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. For now, I'm gonna keep reading Severance and enjoy the windy backyard that I have today. So I just got back from doing a little picnic with my friend. She doesn't really want to be in public stuff, so I didn't get any video or anything, but I am about halfway through Severance. And the basic premise of where we are now is there was a fungal infection that became a pandemic called Shen fever. But instead of being an upper respiratory infection or a lower respiratory infection and a vascular disease, this is actually like a fever that kind of turns people into zombies. I like that it isn't a pure zombie book. So if you're thinking this is going to be a zombie book and you're not into those, like I'm not, that's not the case. So far, when you run into someone who's still alive, who has been infected, they kind of just go through the motions of their day-to-day life, but there's something wrong about it, and they do it in a repeated, obsessive, compulsive way. And we're following Candace, who, we go back and forth between her day job life, her kind of mundane life in New York City before the fever hit, and then what happens kind of immediately after she meets up with this group of people. I'm about halfway through, and the group of people the group of survivors that she's with, something major has happened, and I am seeing a huge turn in the tone of the book. Oh, hello. Thank you for joining me. So the stakes have risen. like pretty dramatically at this point in the book, which is a weird thing to say in a post-apocalyptic book, because as far as the character knows, the United States has kind of fallen because so many people have gotten sick and are either stuck in these behavior loops or have passed away. And there's some illusions that maybe Greenland or the Netherlands is actually doing better, but the United States is definitely in a state of disarray. So it's weird to say that the stakes are about to increase, but her personal stakes, Candace, the main character's personal stakes, are about to go up. So I'm really enjoying this book. The parts that kind of describe her life prior to the pandemic really hit close to home. While I am not the child of immigrants like she is, a lot of the like millennial ennui and kind of the acceptance that we as millennials have had because of the job market and justifying the things that we do for our professional careers because it's just my job kind of hit close to home. Prior to my current career track, I actually worked at a large financial institution, and I justified working for somewhere that really goes against a lot of my values because I needed to pay the bills, and day-to-day life became a slog, and I just went through it. And I feel that Ling Ma really she's going to join us again. I feel that Ling Ma really hit the nail on the head with that feeling of ennui and that millennial existential despair, to the point where it almost feels like Candace is happy that this pandemic led to a change in her life's trajectory. I hope that I'll get through it tonight. I'm about to eat some dinner, if this kitty will let me do that, and I think hopefully finish this up, so I will see you later. It is 7 o'clock on Monday. I am terrible at vlogging, but how do you get better at something? You just keep trying and practicing. I did finish Severance last night, and overall I really enjoyed this book. I think I'm going to go more into it in my wrap-up. I do think that there were some things in this book that were so accurate that it kind of hurt. Like, this is clearly satire, and some of the satire, it's been done before, but not necessarily exactly this way, but the concept of like zombies or zombie-like creatures as a metaphor for becoming an office drone and a slave to capitalism is not new, but it was done in a slightly different way, so I liked that. The actual pandemic escalation, I think, was done super well. Everything from people feeling like they had to continue to do their jobs even if they weren't necessary or essential, whatever definition that is, all the way up to people wearing masks even when they feel like they don't help or when they no longer need masks, to signal that they are not someone who is sick. Not necessarily at a political signal, but there was a ton of parallels. This was published in 2018, and some of the politics, some of the actual ways that American society, specifically New York, responded to this pandemic was eerie. Obviously, there's going to be major differences because the Shen fever in the book Severance, once you get it, you're done. Like, there is no cure, there is no recovering from it, and that's clearly not the case with COVID-19. Not saying COVID-19 wasn't super serious, but it is more of a society shifting as opposed to a society-ending disease. But overall, like, people's initial reactions early on in the pandemic was spot on. Hey all, I just got done with work. Today was an in-office day because we are slowly but surely getting back into the office, which is actually really exciting for me as an extrovert. But I realized in my last clip that I forgot to tell you what I'm reading now, which is Sealed by Naomi Booth. And this is the story of a young woman named Alice and her partner who are wanting to leave the city. Alice is pregnant and she's having a lot of nightmares and anxiety about starting her family. And the part of the reason she's having these nightmares is there's news of an epidemic where people's skin actually seals shut. This is going to be more of a horror novel than the last one, and I have a feeling it's also going to be a lot less realistic overall. I don't know if the pandemic disease is even real in this one. It does say on the back here that it is an ecological nightmare, which is going to be super scary. I wonder if it won't end up being more like a climate-focused book. But yeah, that's my plan today. I'm a little distressed. I got locked out of my car for some reason right after work, so I'm a little bit harried, and I think unwinding with a horror book sounds like a really nice thing to do, which is a weird thing to say. But as a horror fan, I guess it's not. It is super hot, so I don't know if I'm going to be sitting outside or inside, but I will check in with you later. It's been a few hours. I ate dinner, I talked with my roommate, and I got further into this than I was expecting. So, where we are now, I did not realize this was set in Australia. And I'm actually not super familiar with like Australian slang, so I've had to look up some of the slang that's being used in this book, but it isn't really interrupting my reading flow. And this is very much more like an environmental fear. So there is a disease that's happening called cutis, and this disease actually seems to be more like an autoimmune response. And the narrator is kind of obsessed with this and very, very fearful of it happening. It seems to not be super widespread, but she and her partner chose to move to the boonies because there was going to be cleaner air, fewer environmental impacts that could potentially lead to her developing cutis, which is your skin overgrowing. So some people have been found with their mouths and noses, there's skin over them, and they suffocate because they can't breathe. And so far, the people who have been passing away from it are poor people, homeless, unhoused people, and in this case, like Aboriginal people. There's a lot of conversations about different detention centers the narrator, Alice, works in emergency housing, and she was actually in a different state in Australia reviewing like one of the temporary places where people were coming as like climate refugees. So seems to be a near future, but very, very near future book. And it's definitely touching on systemic problems, how global climate change is going to impact the poor population, the indigenous population, and the houseless population first and foremost. And it's pretty intense. She is 8 months pregnant and just moved out to a place where there's not a lot of medical care, and she went to get a midwife, and it looks like things are ramping up. I'm on page 77, and this is only 170 pages long, so I might be able to finish it tonight if I stay up later than I'm supposed to. It is 2:45. I'm taking a quick break from work, which has been just very intense today. I did not stay up too late to finish Sealed last night, so hopefully I'll be able to finish that tonight and then move on to the next book. Things have moved forward a little bit, but we've kind of started stagnating in the plot. The main character, Alice, is in the country, pretty close to the outback in Australia, and there's a lot of conversations happening about how services are being taken away from the space. Oh, of course, I have something on my face. Awesome. All right. But she and her partner are going to get some more assistance, and it turns out like the medical center that she went to earlier that had said they were doing only emergencies is now just completely shut down. Their closest neighbor is actually not wanting to get removed, and they just had a young couple come and visit them and talk about what the politics of the region are. So we're slowing down a little bit in the action, but it's laying down the plot and kind of getting closer, obviously, to the climax. It is really creepy, and I am really enjoying the social commentary still. I think it's a little heavy-handed, but it's a heavy-handed issue, and I think it's actually done pretty well. I am going to finish up my break by checking on my tomatoes, finish up some work, and then hopefully this evening finishing Sealed and starting on my next book. I finished Sealed earlier tonight before I made dinner, and it ended the way I expected. It was very much different from like the current situation or our most recent situation here in the United States, because the pandemic itself was actually the result of pollution. It never really touches exactly on the science of what's happening, and the main character is really disconnected, and I think I don't mind that. There was some weirdness, again, with it being set in, got glare on these glasses, with it being set in Australia. I did a little bit of research, and the author is not Australian, so some of the use of the slang and the stereotyping of like outback era Blue Mountain Ridge area, Australians, kind of hit me the wrong way. Overall, it was a decent story. I wouldn't say it was amazing. It was a quick read. It definitely had some body horror aspects to it that I think could have been done better, actually. But as far as like comparing it to our current situation, it was a very different. Well, I don't want to say So like, a lot of the social commentary in the book is on point, like super on point with the climate concerns and the pollution concerns and the way that pandemics, regardless of what causes them, impacts the poor and the indigenous first. Those are not necessarily the same populations. There is overlap, but regardless of an indigenous person's wealth, like just the overall like systemic racism and systemic injustices having those impacts. There was also a really interesting like view of how people just kind of accept how things are getting bad, and they kind of look at it as like, well, it's bad elsewhere, and that rang so true, especially from the early parts of this pandemic. So that was pretty interesting, but overall the book itself and the story itself was just okay. I am supposed to be in bed. I have tomorrow off, but I need to take my old lady to the vet tomorrow. But I did read the first part of The Pull of the Stars. It is not separated by chapters. It is separated by 4 parts, and this book is like almost 300 pages long, and there's only 4 parts. I also noticed that this book has no quotation marks around the dialogue, and neither did Severance, which is not something I've really encountered before. I don't find it particularly distracting, but I do find it a little strange of a stylistic choice. These are 2 very different books, even though they both are ostensibly about a pandemic. This is clearly going to be a much like more contained story than the other 2. Maybe a little more along the lines of Sealed, because it covers only 3 days. The way that the sections are labeled is related to the color of someone's skin when they are cyanotic, and how as they become sicker, it becomes different colors. And the first section is called Red, which is when you have trouble breathing, so your skin is flushed, but it's not severe, which is suggesting that this book is going to get darker and more difficult the further it goes in. And let me tell you, that first section ends pretty intensely. So the end of Sealed, and this isn't too much of a spoiler because the main character is pregnant and you know that at the beginning, but there is a very harrowing birth scene at the end of Sealed. And I went from that book to this book that has a pretty harrowing birth scene in the first 100 pages. So I love to give myself, some light before bed reading. But I am going to go to sleep now. Despite having tomorrow off, have a busy day. I will try to vlog since I won't be at work. But the vet's not particularly interesting, but you can say goodbye to this hair. Good morning. Yeah, someone's not very happy because it's time to go to the vet. I'm going to take her in and probably read while I'm in my car because they are still doing curbside pickup for vet visits, and I'll update you when I have read more. Ta-da! I got my hair done. I also got some not so great news about one of my pets' health this morning, so I might be taking a little bit of a break from reading the pandemic books because I want to spend some time with her and actually get some real escapism instead of just being reminded of all the horrible things that have happened in the last year and a half. But so far, The Pull of the Stars has been just really fantastically written. Again, not really sure about the no quotations mark thing. It's not bothering me, but I don't know why an author would choose to do that. In the second part of the book, and the lady doctor, who was a member of the Irish Citizens Army, I believe, is on the ward now. So we're going to probably get some more politics as well. I don't actually know a ton about the specifics of Irish politics around 1918. I understand the general gist of what has happened over there, but I don't know a ton, and I'm excited to learn more about that through the book. I think I should probably follow it up with some nonfiction after this. It is being written in a very realistic way, which again is part of why I might need a break from it. But I'm going to go spend some time with my people and my sick kitty and probably read something a little more fun. Excuse the really bad lighting. I'm filming this at like midnight and this was the best lighting, but I have no overhead light, so fun shadow time. I'm clearly still new at this. And I also didn't ever update you on finishing The Pull of the Stars. I actually didn't mean to lie, but I lied and ended up staying up the rest of the night and finishing it. So I am hopefully going to have this vlog up later today. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so I read 3 different pandemic books, or books based in a real or imagined pandemic over the last week to compare how the authors either imagined a future pandemic or portrayed a known pandemic to my own personal experience as someone in the United States who has gotten through the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm not saying this is a fun project. I was just curious about how accurate different things seem to be. And we'll start by talking a little bit more about Severance. I think this was my favorite of the 3. It's very much like a commentary on capitalism and disaffected millennials, which really rang true for me. So overall, this was a 4-star read for me. I think that the portrayal of the lead up to the pandemic was actually strikingly accurate. And that's true for all of them. I'll get into that more later. But in this one, like people continuing to go to work and the argument about what is considered an essential job and what isn't an essential job really hit home. There are some lines in this about people in epidemic or pandemic fashion wearing over-the-top like gas masks before things really kick off, which most definitely happened in the United States. There's also a line in at the beginning of a chapter where Candace realizes like she's thinking back to when it started, and she says, trying to pinpoint the beginning of the end, I think about the way the sky looked that day. And while I don't necessarily remember how the sky looked, I have very distinct memories of when things really got serious in my area. So I really appreciated that, like, overhaul dread. I do think the ending of this book is weak. I plan on talking about that more in my monthly wrap-up. But overall, 4 stars. I highly recommend it if you can stomach reading about a semi-realistic approach to a modern pandemic. Next, I read Sealed by Naomi Booth, and this is also not a viral infection. It is actually an environmental infection, and it's set in the near future, and it's set in Australia. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was more of a horror novel, and it focused on just a very small part of the world. You don't even actually know if this is happening everywhere or to what extent. However, it is a really horrifying disease that makes your skin overgrow, and people are losing the ability to breathe, their ears are closing up. It kind of affects everyone who gets it differently. However, it is not actually a pandemic. It is showing up all over the world, but it's not something that's necessarily contagious, and it's definitely impacting the impoverished communities because it is something that can be healed relatively easily and relatively quickly by a quick surgery. It sounds like once a surgeon cuts into the overgrown skin, it doesn't seem to grow back. But a lot of people don't have access to medical care. And a lot of this story is actually about how the government is trying to push people out of certain areas and into essentially concentration camps because of climate change. This was a 3, like I said. I did enjoy it, especially if you like body horror. This is a really wonderful book to check out. But as far as epidemic stories, it has really great commentary on how epidemics and pandemics impact certain populations more intensely. So that was on point. Like, I do agree with that, and that was absolutely realistic to me. I wish that there had been a little bit more discussion with other characters that weren't just dismissing the main character. Her panic actually kind of mirrored a lot of mine in the early pandemic. I really struggled at the beginning and was becoming a hypochondriac, and I appreciated that part of it. Overall, 3 stars, not a bad read. And finally, I read The Pull of the Stars, and that is by Emma Donoghue. This is the only book that I read for this vlog that was based off of the actual pandemic that's happened in the past as opposed to a potential pandemic in the future. And it is about the 1918 flu. It covers 3 days in an Irish public hospital, and the main character is a nurse. Her name is Julia Powers, and her experiences in a maternity/fever ward during this time. The conversations of the characters talking about the illness, and they clearly didn't know what a virus was in 1918, but they were aware of infectious disease. There's a lot of questioning the government. There was a lot of scoffing at, official higher-ups recommendations. The British government was recommending that people eat an onion a day to help fight infection, which sounds very silly to the nurse. As far as the pandemic feel and how does it compare to current day pandemic responses, it was eerie how much it aligned. Not just the government giving you, like ideas on how to stay safe with it that aren't actually backed by any scientific understanding. The civil unrest that was happening in Ireland at the time, conversations about women's rights, and the interference of faith and science, all of that was very prescient for today, despite this being set over 100 years ago. It was actually written in 2018 and published in 2020. I think she says she sent in the last draft in March of 2020, which for most people, that's when, in the United States, that's when everything really kicked up. I think in the UK as well, and Ireland. I think that shows. I don't know if it was actually her last draft. There is a twist at the end that really pissed me off. I will talk about that particular thing more in the monthly wrap-up because it's a spoiler and it isn't necessarily just pandemic based, but it really made me angry and it's why I disliked this book. I shouldn't be shocked that even in this fiction book there's so many parallels to society's behavior and governmental behavior and individual behavior in response to an unknown threat. While we know more about viruses now, we knew very little about COVID-19, obviously, when everything began. And the way that misinformation spreads, the way that people try to take care of themselves when they don't know what to do and aren't getting the support that they need, and how many things parallel with civil unrest, changes in government structure, changes in prevailing attitudes, whether that's about women or people of other races, or how countries should be allowed to, whether or not they're sovereign, was really, really interesting. And it's so strange to me how parallel it is, but I guess there is that conversation about history repeating itself and how we don't ever seem to learn. So for that, this did an amazing job, and it really was almost a gut punch, but overall as a book, I did not enjoy it. So those are the 3 pandemic books that I read for this vlog, and I had 1 4-star read, 1 3-star read, and 1 2-star read. Overall, as far as enjoyment, and clearly these were a mixed bag, but I think they all did a good job of conveying certain aspects of what it's like to live through a pandemic or the rise of a mysterious disease. They all kind of correctly guessed or speculated, when we're talking about the stuff in the past, how people would respond and what life was like during the rise or during the middle of a disease like that. I'm going to take a break, I think, from some heavy reads and move on to something a little lighter for the rest of June, but I'll see you next time. Bye!